until you kind of, you know, there's a just to grow.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. This is the September 8th meeting of the Hudson Valley REMAC. And our first order of business is to welcome you all back after a good summer. And next order is to do a roll call. So, Fran Brooks.
Here.
David Stewmiller.
Here.
Craig Van Rokens, our representative. Dr. Holden.
Here.
Dr. Mao.
Here.
Dr. Nudovitz. Correct. The representative. Dr. Fareed Cohn, or Alexander Cohn. Dr. Wilson. Dr. Papish. Dr. Santacool, or represent Dr. Vora is here for Dr. Santacool. Dr. Butterfass, or Dr. Brooks for Dr. Butterfass. Dr. Roche is here for Dr. Dittmeyer. Dr. Neifeld. Dr. Hill. Dr. Bennick.
Here.
And Dr. Brooks for one more page. Dr. Berkowitz. Thank you. And Dr. Larson.
Yes, I'm present.
Dr. Berkowitz,
Oh,
you
I
have
saw
to
it.
say
I'm
something
not
against this.
Or Dr. Shaw is here. Yes.
Where?
Right
here.
welcome.
Dr. Shaw.
Good, thank you. Thank you. Review of minutes. Hope everybody's had an opportunity to review them. If there's any corrections or comments. No corrections or comments. Can we get a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
Who was the second? Well,
We have a second also? Move in a second. All in favor? All opposed? Unanimous. Dr. Wilson is now
Dr. Wilson.
Yeah, sorry.
Duchess Hospital. Northern Duchess Hospital. The item number 3 on the agenda is under old business, are the collaborative protocols with BLS. From discussion with Mr. Hughes this morning, I know that many of the county EMS coordinators are continuing to update their BLS squads regarding the collaborative protocols. I don't believe that we have a finalization date for that. Bill, is there
No, I haven't.
an endpoint?
No.
So I imagine that'll continue until all are updated. We're going to talk about some MFI training that has been offered back, I guess it was in June, that we decided that we were going to provide MFI training to broaden the scope of practice for many of the organizations, many of the paramedic organizations in the community that would want to participate by having not only trained persons, but also certified persons. Jeff, did you?
No. What,
Well, about where we had set up the meeting for September 21st, but apparently
there was no interest from any of the agencies to pursue that particular avenue.
what we tried to do is make a central venue here where any agency that wanted to send a trainer to be, someone to be trained to bring back to their own agency to become MFI certified or trained, they could do it themselves then. I know some of the agencies in the region are doing it through their own advances, making contacts with other trainers, with certified MFI trainers, and bring it right to their agency, but nobody's chosen to use the region for that. Imagine that date is still available, or is that closed if anybody does come up?
Date's been closed.
It's been closed?
Right.
Okay.
There's a lack of enrollment.
The lack of interest in participation, okay. Are there any comments on that? Okay. The service upgrades. Town of Wallkill Volunteer Ambulance ALS upgrade. This is a somewhat complicated issue, and I put together some thoughts to try to clarify it. Several members are present who can add to this if necessary, and I'm sure there may be some good opportunities for that. during 2012, 2013, when we began the transition to the collaborative protocols, we recognized that many aspects of our pre-existing medical control plan no longer meshed very well with our new collaborative protocols. So many people here now were members of the protocol committee that helped to rewrite our medical control plan as well as integrate them into our collaborative protocols. One of the outstanding aspects that we changed, one of the revisions that we made, was to address the way that a BOS agency would become an AOS agency. So bear with me because I'm sort of building a little platform here so everybody can understand what's transpired in the last few months. So we wanted to change how a BOS agency would upgrade to an AOS agency. And specifically the changes that we introduced into the prior medical control plan were that we were going to require a fitness and competency, in addition to what was already pre-existing, requiring a public hearing as part of their process to become an AOS agency. Our first application that came to us after we had revised our medical control plan, the first application for an upgrade process back in March of 2014 was when the town of Wallkill Volunteer Ambulance Corps in Orange County informed us of their intent to upgrade to AOS. In response, our executive director, Bill Hughes, provided TOVAC with all of the requirements and all the applications that were necessary to fulfill that requirement, to fulfill the application. They completed that documentation and application in July. On July 9th, all of that was forwarded to this office and approved as their application. It was not completed at that, well, not decided it was completed. The REMSCO office then established a tag to review the application, and our bylaws require that, our medical control plan require that a tag be established. That tag consisted of Albie Bachman of Mobile Medic, Rich Mullally of Shandaken Ambulance, Michael Witkowski, who's the REMSCO president, Bob Como of Putnam EMS, Rich Parrish from Ulster County EMS, the REMSCO executive director, Bill, and the REMSCO medical director, me. Contemporaneously with the tag's initial review, a copy of their application and our standards were sent to the state for the state's review. The response of the New York State Department of Health was that our procedure was somewhat flawed and that our requirement for a review of fitness and competency was not required as we had thought. We thought that was a meaningful aspect of it, just to be sure that the individuals who were signing on as the primaries, as the leading representatives of the new agency were appropriate for the role of the application and of having that responsibility of running the organization. The state informed us that it was not a permissible part of our application process, as that had already occurred with their initial CON when they became a BOS agency. So it was not necessary for us to do that. And that there was no statute and no stature for a public hearing by New York State Department of Health decided that we had no stature to require that it be a public hearing. That the only criteria for their application were A, that they were an agency in good standing, and did they meet our requirements for adequate coverage and sustainable plan for their performance as an AOS agency. So, in the interim, now, TOVAC has applied, we received it, we've reviewed it as a tag, and just last week the state told us that we had to revise our medical control plan to accommodate the changes that they made because our process for application of an ALS upgrade was flawed. So the first thing we did was we asked TOVAC to rescind their initial application. They've done that. They're very cooperative in that, no problems. They pulled back on their application. The TAG has decided that we're going to request members today to review and approve the changes in our medical control plan that would just simply, and it's not going to take a lot of review, it's just going to be simply removing the public hearing and removing the fitness and competency aspects. And that there's no reference at all to a public hearing. Assuming that we make those changes to our medical control plan today, TOVAC will promptly resubmit an AOS upgrade application consistent with our new standards being without fitness and competency, without public hearing. The TAG will meet again after TOVAC submits their application we'll review their new application again, and if it meets our standards, the TAG will bring it to this committee for the November 2014 meeting. So it's a complex and difficult situation, but I think the office here has really done a good job of trying to remedy it. The flaws were not generated by the office, they were generated by the protocol committee in good faith. It was our intent to make this as seamless a process and as safe a process and as effective a process to approve a new agency, but we overstepped our boundaries. So what I'd like to do, Bill, any comments?
Well, we have Mike on the phone if we want to ask him.
And Mike Witkowski, the Remsco president, is here as well.
Well, he's on the phone.
I pointed to the machine thinking it was alive.
Mike, is there anything that you'd like to add to that?
No, Dr. Speck covered most of it. Again, unfortunately, our best intentions, and the State Health Department acknowledged our best intentions on this. Again, there is no statute that we could stand behind if the process was ever challenged. And after speaking with our own attorney as well as several other attorneys, the recommendation is the procedure that we're currently following. So it's kind of important that we go ahead and move forward with making the changes that are necessary in order to continue to move processes forward.
If I could just recap, just so I'm clear on this, Dr. Stutt, you're saying that when the application was initially handed in, the Department of Health stated that the fitness and competency portion of that's already been met when they applied to the BLS level initially. Therefore, it's not required this time. In addition, there's no state statute or framework for us to have public hearing either. There's no law to base that. So that needs to, so those two things are going to be removed.
Right.
Everything else stays in place. They're going to resubmit it after we clean that up, and then we move forward. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So, Dr. Shaw?
Was the review done by the TAG under the old way?
Yes.
And it was fine?
We were pleased and satisfied
Okay.
and would have recommended moving ahead. Is that the consensus of the group on
That's-
that?
Yeah.
We would have moved ahead.
Our process was too cumbersome for the states,
Right. And Eric,
But
as
they-
I said, we did not need to put in
but
there.
they met those hurdles anyway.
They, yeah.
Well, everything but the public hearing.
Yeah.
We didn't have the public hearing.
Dr.
And they did say that we have no, if the public hearing was brought forward and there was any action taken against it, we have no recourse to say why we have that there. We don't, it was unnecessary. And the fitness and competency was just to make sure that the state would tell us that they are in good standing and that should be sufficient.
So I must ask, since there is nothing additional required and only things are being removed, could we not review them now?
They have to reapply.
Well, they have to reply, and you should actually review, everybody should review the application. I do have copies of it for everybody here, so that you can look at it and make sure that everybody that's going to vote on it feels confident that what the TAG is saying and the information coming back from the TAG is good.
We've not been able to accept their application until we vote on changing our prior medical control plan.
Can
Dr. Shaw?
someone apply straight for ALS? You can do that without the BLS, right? The reason I'm asking then,
No.
okay,
In the way New York State works, you have to have a CON to operate as a BLS service.
okay.
And then from the BLS service, it's a regional MAC decision to let them practice as an ALS service.
So anyone applying for ALS will always have the CON
Yes.
and the competencies in
Yes.
place before they...
Yes, they have to. And then they have to come to this body to
Gotcha.
become an ALS
Okay.
service.
Any other comments, questions? Well then, let me just try to frame a motion. So I would move that the REMAC eliminates the requirements for fitness and competency and eliminates the requirements for a public hearing from the application and requirements for an ALS upgrade.
I second that motion.
Well, in relationship to this application alone.
going forward,
For any agency.
any age, going
Okay,
forward.
okay.
All right, add that, please, if you would. Going forward, that the REMAC, Hudson Valley REMAC, eliminates the requirement for fitness and competency and public hearing in regard to applications for ALS upgrades. Is that, could we get a second?
I second that motion.
Dr. Wilson seconds.
I have copies of both Section 5 and Section 6 of the medical control plan of what the new plan does say. I also have copies if you want to see what the old plan says and see what we removed, but it was just the specific sections of it that referred to public hearing and fitness and competency. So if anybody wants to see them, I have them.
For discussion, this is pursuant to the recommendations by the New York State
It was New York State Department of Health,
DOE.
our legal advice, Joe Owen, who's our legal advisor, and both recommended that this was the best way to do this.
So we have a second. All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? Unanimous. Thank you. Under service upgrades, Watchtower, Bible, and Track CO of N, that remains incomplete. We're awaiting their application before we can move ahead on that. Evaluation sub.
What's the, I'm sorry, what's the address on that?
On Watchtower?
Yeah.
It's going to be in Tuxedo. Can't remember the exact address. Silvermine Road. It's going to be there. They actually have two facilities. There's going to be a 200 and I think a 250-acre world headquarters being built in Tuxedo, and then they have a secondary site that's about 40 acres. That's going to be a training site that's within 5 miles of that. They also have currently have two CONs within our region, within the Hudson Valley region, one in Patterson, New York, and one in Warfield, New York.
Okay.
And we talked with the DOH on this one also, and asked if it would be better to just expand the territory or to put up a new CON, and everybody felt that it would be better to do a new CON for that, for this area.
Right. The Walk Hill is in Ulster County, has nothing to do with the town of Walk Hill, which is in Orange.
Right. Yeah, I'm sorry, yes.
Evaluation Subcommittee, Dr. Brooks.
Nothing to report.
Thank you. Helicopter Committee, Dr. Stu Miller.
The only order of business before the committee was a request from this body to revise the helicopter operations guideline, and the only response I received from the committee members was a minor address change, and so I would like to pass around the document specifically because there is an appendix with capabilities that the hospitals possess, including whether there's a helipad, whether they have hyperbarics, neonatal, obstetrical, pediatric, intensive care, etc. And so I would like to take advantage of the fact that we have the directors in this room so that they could update this appendix. And my plan will be to revise minorly this document and present it back to this body at the meeting in November. I can submit it prior to the November meeting if there's a required time period for review that everyone would appreciate. I can certainly get it done by that deadline.
Will the appendix or the hospital capabilities be online somewhere that we can access that as well, or?
It's currently a PDF, and so I have it into a Word file and I can modify it, but I don't have it posted anywhere online.
Okay, will you do that in the future, you think? Is that helpful?
Does the region have the ability to have an online posting of this?
Yeah.
I mean, it may already be online.
Under the region or under
Don't think
your?
it is.
I don't think it
Okay.
is. I've never seen anything like that.
So Dave, you submitted to Bill? and-
Certainly. So I'll pass this around and ask everyone to put a check mark next to their hospital and please fill in the appendix to the tables. Otherwise, I have nothing else to report. Thanks.
Thank you. Quality Improvement Report, Jeff Crusher.
Okay, agency audits are ongoing. So far, 11 agencies have been completed. Basically comparing the information that we have on each provider of ALS agencies in comparison to their home agencies and secondary agencies, making sure we have copies of all their cards, their credentials are up to date. So it's progressing fairly well. Provider portal, the new database, we're about 2 weeks from the first look at it. Project seems to be moving along at a good pace. Provider photo IDs. This past summer we purchased a printer and software necessary for making actual laminated photo IDs for all MAC providers. So we're in the process of finalizing a couple of design options, and we'll go forth from there.
Mr. Lamarca.
Just a question, I mean, how are we gonna get each MAC certified person's photo?
The theory being that some will have to come in for photo IDs taken, but if the agency already has photo IDs, we can import their photos right from there. So it's not too cumbersome a process.
Is it a badge that has to be displayed, I guess?
Yes.
Well, then that is a cumbersome process. They're already wearing the IDs.
Alternatively, they could carry in their wallet like they do their current MAC card.
It's
Sure.
It's fine to carry, but not to necessarily wear, you know?
Yeah, but either or.
Okay.
Will that be provided to members of this committee?
Absolutely.
Any other comment on that, on the provider photo IDs? Okay. Under new business, Bill Hughes is going to tell us about the office move.
Well, December 31st, our lease is up on this office. We've been here 3 years. We didn't think it would go that quickly, but it did. The landlord here is not very conducive to us staying. He's doubled our rent, and it's not something that we can afford. So we are looking at multiple places. We do have one that we think is fairly close to here. It's in the airport area. It's 33 Airport Center Drive. It's a office space with in the building it has a common conference room that is a little bit larger than this, and will seat everybody that would normally come to our meetings. So we can get more office space for less rent and still get the conference room associated with it. So that's really the one that's on our list right now. We'll let you know. But the November meeting, we're looking to get out of the lease a little early, so we might have the November meeting here, or we might have it there. So we're not sure at this point in time, but we will let you know. Okay? But it would be the same transportation in the area. It's only maybe a mile down or 2 miles down the road.
Okay. Next item are the medical control contact hour lectures and medical control hospitals, the relationship between two of those.
Wait, I lost you.
I'm sorry.
And the medical control what?
Medical control contact hours
Okay.
provided by medical control hospitals is the topic. And in section 9 of our medical control plan, it's delineated that a medical control hospital must provide one medical control contact hour per course. Per quarter, not per course, one course per quarter. The medics must get 24 hours every 3 years of medical control contact hours, in addition to other CME that they're required, other documentation of CME. So, with few exceptions, most of the hospitals in the Hudson Valley region have not been providing medical control contact hours to the rate of one per quarter, or a course per quarter. And the issues with this are multiple. One is that our medics are not able to get adequate medical control contact hours if it's not being offered in the areas where they work. Secondly, they're not establishing the relationships with the medical control physicians that this would allow if there were courses once every quarter. And at issue here is, this is a standard that we all established, all of us established it. And everyone in this room is responsible for providing CME as part of their agreement to participate in the REMAC. how can we make those two areas meet so that we are providing those needed contact hours that we all agreed to do? How can we improve this for the county? And how can this office help you with that requirement?
Can I ask you to define that a little bit? Because, for example, if we do monthly case reviews and a lecture, does that qualify as medical control contact hours? Is that what we're supposed to be doing? Because that's what we do. I don't know if that fulfills the
I'll
requirement.
ask Jeff to clarify that.
I just want to be sure in terms of what is it? Is it, for example, if I'm there and answering questions, is that adequate, or do I have to actually give the lecture?
Jeff?
You should have maybe 50% participation within that presentation, lecture, or question and answer period for that to be considered med control.
Okay.
Mr. Mark?
We did put together for this last review of our policies and procedures a companion document to help distinguish between CME and the medical control contact hours, and also some suggestions for the facilities. And certainly what you're talking about certainly does meet the requirements. And as Jeff pointed out, you're supposed to have like 50% of a medical control physician, medical control nurse practitioner, or PA to conduct it, so it counts. The only other thing that we did put in there is that a lot of what they're getting right now, probably, if you look at it closely, is not usable, because in many cases, it's beyond their level. I mean, we've had a lot of presentations that are done because somebody had it, I guess I'd say, and it's above the level of the paramedics sometimes too. So that document also talks about trying to give you perspective on where their level of training is so that it can be appropriate to them. And the difference between CME, because the region only controls medical control contact hours or physician contact hours. When you use the term CME, since so many of our providers are refreshing their state credentials or their state EMT or paramedic card through the CME program, that's very specific. So if you're engaged in that, you have to take a look at the state criteria. But there's a document I think everybody has access to. It's online, and and hopefully it can help you.
Are we strict about the quarter? Does it have to be one per quarter, or is 4 in a year?
I think it's 4 in a year.
But can it be 4 hours in one day?
Imagine it could be.
Okay.
Those, there are adequate hours offered to as medical control contact. Fran?
Yeah, I kind of feel strongly about this. Way back when a lot of it started, part of the joy in being medical control is working with the pre-hospital providers to establish the relationship with the providers that come to your hospital. And therefore, they're kind of understanding what we need from them, and they understand what they need from us, vice versa. And what happens when you don't do these audits, I call them online CMEs, but they're basically case reviews in getting the CME content out. And you become much closer to these people who are working under your license. And it makes it much easier for them to come if there are questions, if there are problems, if there are any kind of issues out there, to remediate them, even on a personal level and not just an educational and actual medical level. And they're the providers that sometimes determine who may live and who may die by doing it right out in the field. And when we're not adequately educating the pre-hospital providers, we're really not doing our job. I mean, they're just going by what's written in black and white, but not really getting a feel for what we need. And so, for me, and I know a lot of us at this table here have spent years doing a lot of teaching, and it's been very fulfilling, and as a result, I think the care improves out in the community. And the problems arise when there's not that kind of relationship between a hospital and the pre-hospital providers in that area. And even giving it 4 hours one time a year, nobody's establishing relationship. Unless the pre-hospital providers come in and they feel comfortable and have time, and the physician or nurse practitioner, PA, has time, which we don't, to go over cases right then and there. It's not like years ago when we used to do that. It's very difficult. And a lot of it's a revolving door. It's very, very difficult. So, you know, although 4 per year is fun and maybe satisfying the requirement, it's really, to me, not fulfilling what our responsibility is as a 911 receiving hospital. You know, why it's not done, I'm not sure. I know that in Dutchess County, we give so many CMEs, audit CMEs, whatever. We have basically a good rapport with our pre-hospital providers. So, you know, I think you should question why you're not doing it, and then how we can help you do it. Even if you need to borrow somebody who does it all the time to go there, that was an option we talked about before the meeting here, although, again, one of us doesn't have the same relationship with the pre-hospital providers. But I would look at it, and if you guys can't do it as directors, you know, have a designee who likes to teach. We all as physicians like to teach. We've grown up in a teaching environment. So if you can't do it, the directors have a lot of responsibility and very little time. But there may be somebody in your group who really likes to do it, and you can ask them to be in charge of it and to produce one every quarter. You know, a 2-hour session every quarter, and you know, it'd be much appreciated on both ends. But that's mandated by what we need to do as 911 receiving hospitals to maintain that credential.
That's it. Mr. Lamarck.
Just for a point of information, some regions throughout the state and some other states have kind of started like a library of presentations that sometimes can be used in these programs. And so if anybody from the region wanted to share for the common good, you know, I'm sure we can library them here so that, you know, if you want a little variation or something that you can do. Because really right now, one of our biggest things, if you take a look at the total amount of educational opportunities, count how many stroke centers we have, and know that they have to do 2 stroke presentations a year, and you start looking throughout our region, we'll probably have like 30 stroke presentations. You know, so disproportionate to everything else we do. So, you know, if you wanted to open up and share your PowerPoint, your program, something like that others could use it, that might help to keep it on track, you know, or make it easier.
But you want to use cases that come into your hospital or your area. I mean, that's part of the point, and use the protocols, protocol driven. So wouldn't it be nice to use the cases that come in, and people kind of have heard about it, aware of it, or as teaching points of what really happened, you know.
Maybe those two concepts could be combined. You can have case reports pertinent to the discussion, the CME part of the discussion is going on, but make, you know, tie the two together, make it real life. And like you said, having that contact between the physicians and the paramedics is invaluable.
I mean, the way I've done it, and I mean, I do a fair amount of calls. I have a pretty large library of talks that either I put together or people have given me or whatnot. And well, I'll go through a bunch of cases and I'll find cases and I'll say, oh yeah, this relates to this talk. And then I say, well, now I have this case and I have this existing talk that I've given maybe 2 years ago or 3 years ago, or my friend sent me, or whatever it is, and I'll say, well, I can do the talk, and I can talk about the medical content using the lecture I have, talk about the case, and then talk about what the protocol we have is, and it makes it an easier way of doing it, rather than having to kind of invent all of it at once. So it's just because it's hard enough to find the cases. I mean, it's hard enough to find cases that are worthy of talking, that are interesting. So at least if I say I'm going to focus on most of my time on finding the right cases, and I have a lot of talks that I can just adapt or work with, it makes it easier. So I think that the idea of a library might help people. Obviously, we need a librarian.
How much will that pay?
Was that? You weren't volunteering.
I was absolutely not volunteering. I'm volunteering. I have lectures I'm happy to share. I'm happy to share lectures I have on stuff that is, I mean, to Andy's point, I have tons of stroke lectures, but I also
don't feel free to send them.
No. I've done. They're all memorized. But I have, I think that there's a lot of other stuff out there too.
Yeah. Just one point to emphasize, with Dr. Brooks' point, the term protocol-driven is a key thing, because a lot of times presentations on and they never reference the current either BLS or the ALS protocols, but if that's kind of like the nucleus, it usually is a good in-service.
Wasn't that part of our designed for CME that had to be related to our protocols and had to be approved by the region prior to.
But you'd be surprised how many presentations never reference a protocol.
Anything further about CME and medical contact hours? Okay.
I just have one note back on this document that was circulated, the Regional Air Medical Services Utilization Guide. People are supposed to check and update, as Dr. Stu Miller had suggested. One thing I noticed here, that there's not a column, and maybe we should add a column for cardiac intervention. No? Yes?
There used to be a column for cardiac intervention.
I don't see it. Am I missing it? I don't know.
PCI, cardiac surgery.
Please add a column for cardiac
Okay.
intervention.
Okay, so we should.
Thank you, Dr. Larson.
Okay, we'll put that in.
Hospital resignations, if they could do PCI.
And so we'll, I mean, there's a lot of names for it, so we're using PCI? Is that what we're going to use? Okay, PCI it is.
PCI cable.
Okay. Okay. Okay, that's all, I'll pass that around, I'm just adding that column.
Item 9 on the agenda is the CMAC report. That's going to be deferred until November, the November meeting. Number 10, there are no pad proposals, EpiPens, albuterols, glucometer, or Narcan updates. But I want to revert back to new business. We jumped out of that, and that was my mistake. Two other items for new business are that the regional office has undertaken to become an opioid overdose prevention program, community-based organization. And there are two aspects of that. One is that the region will now be able to offer courses to the community on opioid overdose prevention and be able to distribute nasal naloxone ampules to those who are trained for their own personal use, family use, friend use, contact use. The other aspect is that because we are now a community-based organization, any of us here can sign up as affiliated prescribers to the community-based organization, meaning that you can sign prescriptions. If you're a member of if you're an affiliated prescriber, you can sign prescriptions for other agencies that have the right to deliver Narcan. The BLS and ALS personnel don't need you for that. They all have medical directors to allow for that. But it does allow you for police organizations and other community organizations that want to have a program to deliver nasal naloxone. They need prescriptions for that. And one of the aspects, police particularly, are becoming very involved in getting their staff to all be able to carry nasal naloxone. The Department of Criminal Justice Services has been offering courses throughout the state, but they're individualized courses and not geared necessarily to the time schedules that police departments have. Many police departments are looking for medical providers to be a medical director. If you sign on with our community-based organization, you can then write prescriptions for the programs that they get that can be approved by DCJS, operate under your approval, and do require your oversight for reviewing cases as they occur, and then it's their agency's responsibility to send it into the state on a yearly basis. And there have been a remarkable number of saves already. Is Mike Murphy still here in the back? Mike has been very instrumental down in Rockland County, getting many of the agencies involved there, and I know they've had a surprisingly large number of saves in just a few months doing that. So if anyone is interested in becoming an affiliated provider, please let Bill know, and he has a sign-on sheet for you. Yeah?
What's the process? Just sign a paper?
You just have to sign on as an affiliated prescriber for this community-based organization. I mean, you can be a prescriber for police agencies. So the way the police agencies work is different than EMS agencies. In EMS, they have the right to provide medications to each ambulance unit or each ALS bag. Police each get an individual prescription. The way it's been working is you write a prescription for each police officer. It doesn't necessarily mean that every police officer gets their own prescription, but each of them have the right to be using the nasal naloxone. The agency itself, the police department, can buy X number of units to distribute to each car that goes out, but it's under the prescriber's name. So each police officer will have a prescription for that.
Yeah, just for the record, I'm going to say that this state has really not done this right again. And the costs are just, kind of ridiculous for the police agencies. And it's unfortunate that we have to help kind of step in like this. I think it's good. We should be doing it. There is no opioid task force in Orange County. Last night we had another death, actually, in St. Anthony, a young individual. So this is a real problem. Everybody's seen it in their EDs. It's unfortunate.
For those of you who are connected to different police departments, you might encourage them, if they want to do it promptly, because the DCJS is providing free medications through December for all prescribers. After December, nobody knows where the program's going to go.
Is there any downside for us not all signing on? I mean, what's the oversight involved?
Is reviewing cases where they've used, make sure their educational program is consistent with the DCJS, which is in a format, a printable format that I can send to you, anybody who's interested to see what the format is. Every police officer who gets trained has to be trained by a DCJS trained officer, not necessarily trained in narcotics, but has to know how to provide education to police officers. And you have to be the medical director. You don't have to do the presentation, you just have to approve the course, which the DCJS has canned already. They have to be taught by an instructor who provides a list of names. You write the prescriptions for those officers, and then you do the oversight of every time they use it. And then they report it to the state. The prescriptions don't come to you, they go to the agency. You can sign up with any of a multitude of drug distribution houses, such as Moorhead or Boundtree, that just send it directly to the police officer, a designated individual at the police department. David, Mr. Violante.
And seeing the cost of these things, just as an aside, it may be beneficial for you guys that have your BLS squads to try and make some inroads perhaps with your hospital pharmacies as potential sources for providing these medications. Just to give you guys an idea, the EpiPens that BLS providers are supposed to carry, that double pack, is about $500. And they expire every, I think it's 15 months or so. And so it's becoming a little onerous for squads. So, having a common place where they can have a higher volume replacement may be a good idea too. Maybe the Narcan can fall into that.
So the nasal naloxone is $25 to $35 per 2 milligram ampule, and the atomizer is about $6 to $8, depending on who you buy it from. So it's $35 per prescription, and everybody's supposed to carry 2. So as you can see, as Dr. Van Rokens was saying, they expire in a year. For a police department that has 50 officers, it's really not cost effective to replace everyone a year. So it's much more cost effective to have 4, 5, 6 that go out on each rig, and they just replace those as necessary under anybody's name. Okay, any comments on that? Opioid overdose. We've come to that point of time where we read the Department of Health enforcement issues. First is Coling Medical Transport from Brooklyn, New York, for violation of Public Health Law 3010, subset 1. They were suspended for 3 years, effective September 2nd, 2014. The suspension is stayed. They were assessed a civil penalty of $8,000. Patrick Manning of Grand Island, New York, for violation of Part 800, suspended for 1 year, effective August 20th. Suspension is stayed, placed on probation for 3 years, effective August 20th, 2014. Not allowed to apply or recertify for instructor status for 1 year, effective August 20th, 2014. Edward Kasparek of Fulton, New York, violation of Part 800, suspended for 6 months, effective 8/15, placed on 3 years probation, civil penalty of $2,000. Joseph Baldwin of North Babylon, New York, violation Part 800, suspended and deemed to have served concurrently with the respondent's actual suspension by the Suffolk County REMAC. placed on probation for a period of 3 years, effective April 30th, assessed a civil penalty of $3,000. Gaby Day, Brooklyn, New York, violation Part 800, suspended for 1 year, effective May 19th, 30 days actual suspension effective May 19th to June 18th. Remaining 355 days are stayed. Open forum. Jeff, I'm sorry, is that Mr. Murphy?
Morning, I just wanted to comment briefly on the idea that the tenant of the fitness and competency.
He's gotta raise his voice.
ALS upgrade.
Could you speak up, Mike?
Speak up, Mike.
When we had.
I missed the whole first part. I don't know.
Mike, can you start from the beginning? Start from the beginning.
Okay. I wanted to speak to the TAG's idea of inserting fitness and competency into the ALS upgrade and what our mentality was at the time, even though obviously perhaps we used the wrong terminology. When a service upgrades, oftentimes the folks that are coming in to do the upgrade and are running the upgrade proposals are not necessarily the BLS principals or the principals of the ambulance corps. So we wanted to make sure that the REMAC looked at the folks that were doing the upgrades, and not only that, looked at their business plan. Now, speaking now as a resident of the town of Deer Park, we have our home ambulance corps, Port Jervis Ambulance Corps, which is in the newspaper recently, is now suffering significant financial hardship, which they've had for the past couple of years. They have gone back to the two municipalities to ask for funding, which they're not going to receive. So now they're in a dilemma, and they're going to put the citizens of the town of Deer Park and the city of Port Jervis in a dilemma now, because in my opinion, they may not have had a proper business plan. We have not seen those principals here since they got their upgrade. Nobody from operations has ever come to a REMAC meeting. We've never seen the medical director. Now we have a city and a town in Orange County which may be severely impacted in the loss of ALS and the subsequent void that has been created because one may have not had an adequate business plan in promoting their ALS upgrade. So it was our intention, even before the news about Port Jervis had been released, that when an ALS upgrade is done, that organization provides an adequate business plan as to how they're going to be able to service their communities for the long term. And that was our intent with the fitness and competency, was that we not only examined the black and white of the application, but you also looked at the impact upon the community, the surrounding services, and whether there was an adequate business plan for long-term survivability.
One of the things that New York State Department of Health did do was compliment us on our efforts to do that. And I think what they basically said was the way we went about doing it was not correct. And that we would have to set the criteria and the expectations in the body of the upgrade documents. Now, we have done that, I think we have, in what we've reviewed and what we've asked the TAG to look at. So I'm not sure as how deep we can go into the financial aspect of that, but I know that we can make sure that there's criteria there for at least a length of time. And the second thing that they suggested was that maybe we expand some of the probationary periods. Right now, any agency that moves to an ALS status is on probation for a year with a 6-month review. They're supposed to come here and give us a 6-month review, and then another annual review before they become a permanent ALS service. It was suggested that we might want to look at a longer length of time. Could be 24 months with a 6, 12, and 18-month review. It could be longer or something of that nature that would allow us to at least see how they're progressing with that business plan. Those are things that I think we have to look at, and I think what we should do after we need to get through this process because they are, Wallkill was in process already, would be to take another harder look at that, make sure that we have that criteria listed in the actual update plan, and make sure that what we can do to make that criteria of a business plan be much stronger.
Dr. Stutt?
Yes, Mike?
Okay, if you wouldn't mind, I would request the MAC to create a tag specifically to address the medical control plan. That tag will probably meet simultaneously with the current or the one that will be currently in progress. What I'd like to do is get that set up so that we can start looking at the changes that need to be made to tighten up the processes, as well as the back-end process of the ALS upgrade. As all the MAC members are aware, the action that we've just taken is stepped with the current what will be with the Town of Wallkill that'll be going. Any changes that are made to the medical control plan at this point, we will not be able to consider. Well, actually, we could consider them with them, but we would like to get a tag started. So if we could get a group together or get a tag set up for the medical control plan review, that would be beneficial, so we can get that started as well.
Well, Mike, let me point out that seated at our table now are several principal members of the protocol committee that worked from 2012 to early 2014 revising the medical control plan. And it might be worthwhile to utilize those personnel as well in that, or specifically utilize those personnel, because many of the suggestions for the revision of the medical control plan originated with that protocol tag. I'm not sure they were really called the tag, they were called the protocol committee.
That would be fine. We could use the same thing. We just need to make sure we have an identification of who the people are, and that everybody's aware that they're going to go ahead and start. So if anybody from the agencies want to have additional input on it, we can make them aware when the meetings are going to be and whatnot, and anybody can just make them aware. Everybody can have input into the process at this point.
So, would you see that?
Yeah, we can.
Specifically delegating that subcommittee or sub-tag to look at the ALS process?
Correct.
Okay, I think that can be done. We can probably institute that, get the protocol committee members back together prior to the next tag meeting after today's vote, which we've already completed.
Perfect.
Does that sound reasonable? What we're saying is that we're going to get the protocol committee back together, the people who are instrumental in revising the medical control plan, to look at those areas that are pertinent to the ALS upgrade, see if any further changes need to be made before we move ahead and submit TOVAC's application to those standards. Members of the protocol committee who are here feel okay about that? Good. Thank you. Okay. So noted. Thank you, Mike. Okay. Mr. Parrish.
On the open forum, Health Alliance of the Hudson Valley Broadway campus, we're having big issues with getting PCRs, both paper and electronic. And checking with other hospitals, it's a problem across the system. One agency adamantly refuses to leave PCRs or even send them to us electronically. They want us to install a desktop on our charge nurse's platform and have her sign on and then download the PCR. No other agency requires that. I know only one hospital, Bon Secours, has done it, but all the other hospitals have not, and they've elected not to go that route. Checking with other hospitals, they all have the same problem. They are not getting a copy of the PCR, either paper or electronic. What we're looking at doing at our facility is coming up with a small 3x5 cheat card like the EMS 9, so that before they leave, they at least give us that pertinent information. But it appears to be not just a problem at our facility, but at all facilities.
Have you initiated that small card?
And right now, it's in the draft form.
Have you gotten any input from any of the ALS agencies about?
Right now, my physicians are the ones that looked at it. I'll
Okay.
pass that out to the other agencies, that this is where we're going. I know one hospital down in Putnam that if you don't turn in some type of paperwork, they will not sign the PCR, and they will not replace supplies until they get a document.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, I strongly second that. I mean, it's a huge problem at our hospital. We're just, I mean, I look over records and look on there, how did the patient get here? EMS, ALS, BLS, never see an ambulance report or, you know, a PCR.
And it's putting the hospitals in violation of the hospital code 405. And when I addressed this with Mike Taylor, oh, that's a hospital problem. No, it's a system problem, all right? We're required to have in our medical records a copy of the PCR, and it's not there. So when we get audited, that's an issue. What really brought it to light is we got a subpoena, and we did not have the PCR to back up what the EMS agencies did.
Mr. Violante.
I don't disagree with anything that's been said here, and we find this issue with agencies as well that don't have the ability to print out a PCR because they don't carry a machine, a printer in the vehicle, or there's not a printer at the hospital or whatever. I think a good way forward is to be able to integrate the electronic PCRs with the electronic hospital systems so that the PCR is there electronically and all the data is moved over into the appropriate HL7 code and all that kind of stuff, and then it's available otherwise throughout the entire hospital. Some of the other issues we've had is dropping off a PCR and not even getting to the patient folder, or being missed here and there. So perhaps the region can help to facilitate, even with the local RIO, a way of getting electronic data from the pre-hospital environment to electronic data in the in-hospital environment as a way forward.
All right, again, talking with Mike Taylor, that is his long-term plan, but we need something now. At my facility, we give them 2 fax machines, Mobile Life has a dedicated fax machine, all right? We give them a printer, it's there, and we don't pay.
So, Mr. Barrett, I can understand they may not be able to integrate from their ambulance or on arrival to give you the PCR. Could they not, when they go back to their base, could they not print it out there on their platform and then fax it to you?
Now, another agency, another larger agency in Ulster County does that. Within an hour, we have a copy of their PCR. They go back to their base, complete it, fax it in, all right?
So why couldn't the smaller agencies do the same? They have to be able to download it for themselves, for their own records, and they certainly have fax capacity or scanning capacity. I would imagine, not certainly, but I imagine they do.
Again, we make faxes available to them. We do have a printer available to them. There's one particular agency adamantly refuses, and we give them the fax numbers and all, and no, you have to go online and download it.
Was there any other comment? I saw another hand.
I just want to say the logistics of actually integrating an electronic medical record with the numerous EMRs is much more difficult than people understand, and it's not going to be close to happening. I know we just even did a new EMR for our hospital system, and it's a very difficult. I mean, the registration in our hospital can't even talk to our electronic medical record. So, I think honestly, records like this are scanned in. If we can get a printer, the easiest remedy is to either have a fax or have a paper copy printed out, and then it's scanned in for anybody in the hospital. Then it's incorporated as a scanned document. But I'm just wondering, are you looking for the committee to somehow enforce or mandate a rule
I need
state,
direction. When I call this- when I-
or
It doesn't
a way to
go,
enforce the state rule to
We
be
have
able
no
to
way to
provide it.
enforce it.
We have, I believe that exists in our medical control plan, that a copy of the PCR must be left at the receiving facility.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's been there for 20 years. Enforcement is another issue, but the policy exists there. Good common sense dictates that it should happen. I mean, you can't, you can,
We have
but
the same
you're
problem.
compromised when you're trying to manage a patient not knowing what was done before you put your hands on it. The state has had some comment on that also about what is acceptable for electronic PCRs and whose responsibility it is. But whether the state says it's whose responsibility it is, it doesn't really matter. It's really an issue of cooperation. I mean, we should be one seamless system. Even if our electronics are not, there are ways, and as you suggested, they could fax you, they could scan it, they could email it once they're back at their own facility. It may be 20 minutes later, but it's better than not having it at all. Ideally, the card idea is good because it gives the provider a real-time handle on what's happened. Whatever you might have on your card, it might be great if you could share it with us at another time.
Yeah.
To say, yeah, these are things we all need when we receive a patient, to be able to manage them appropriately so we don't duplicate medications, that we see which pathway you were going with that. And maybe it's something that goes on, maybe it should be the medical directors of each agency to address that directly with their agencies, to say, you've got to find some way to cooperate. Be it fill out the cards at Kingston Hospital, fax it, scan it, email it. They have to have something. It's just part of our system that works together. Mr. Lamarca.
I would just urge that everyone go back and just check what the status is in their own facility too, because I gotta tell you, a lot of times, well, first of all, we bought more fax machines than like, Best Buy to put into these hospitals. And half the time, that number's been given away to the pizzeria, to the lab, and, we found out we're trying to fax in our report when, we're behind 70 pages of documents and it's not coming out. So look at your own system, but when we butt up against IT in the hospitals, I mean, they have no humor. There's it's just that they're protecting, the castle for the most part, and it's ridiculous because we've had cases where we're inside trying to wirelessly, transmit, the electronic record. We're blocked. We actually have to run back outside to try to pick up a signal in our trucks because inside it's like super uber, protective. And so somehow, if you could take a look and just see if you need to maybe facilitate something between IT and the field units, and that doesn't cover the guys that are doing it hard copy, but the electronics sometimes have been stymied by not being able to get a meeting with somebody, which is kind of ridiculous.
I bet Mr. Parrish has tried that.
We've talked to him.
Which hospital has a pizzeria?
Right, that's where I would work.
Orange Regional, you got pizza served right there.
Okay. The next item is a new product that's been introduced to BLS, and I'm going to ask Jeff Crutcher to provide the introduction.
Okay. Carol Ackerman, you come on up and take over. See if I can.
While they're getting set up, I'll give you a copy of the town of Walkville.
Okay, we're off the record, Dr. Scott, for any, are we off the record? Okay, about 4 people came in late.
Okay. Dr. Medevitz? Who else came in late? Dr. Holden
Dr. Holden I got,
and Dr. Wilson, who's 4 days
Dr.
out.
Wilson I got, somebody, Dr. Nine,
Well, I'm sorry.
yeah.
Not that I don't know who Dr. I just don't recognize who came in.
I'm Carol Ackerman. I'm clinical educator with Innovative Trauma Care. We make the IT clamp. I'm also a paramedic. I'm up in Rockland. So Jeff asked me and Dr. Studd asked me to talk about the IT clamp. It's another tool in our EMS toolbox. Also, it's another tool in our EMS toolbox for hemorrhage control. It's relatively new. It's FDA approved for the last year or so. And just starting to be used on ambulances in New York. It's being used in Chicago, Atlanta Fire Department, training Kentucky next week. So it's definitely picking up. The military's been using it for a couple of years now, and internationally it's been used for the last 2 years. So just want to give you a little bit of overview of what it's about. This slide, this is sort of mid-training. I go through a pretty detailed training program with EMS providers and ER staff that are going to use this, it's very, important to go over when it's appropriate and also how to take it off. And safety. So, as you'll see, it's a little bit sharp on the bottom. So, basically, this is our spectrum of bleeding wounds. So, on the left side, we've got our minor bleeding, which can be easily controlled with direct pressure and wrapping it up. On the right side, we've got our traumatic amputations, which you would need a tourniquet for. Anywhere that you can approximate the edges of the skin would not be appropriate for the IT clamp. So difficult to control bleeding is really what we talk about when we're considering what to use. And my difficult to control may be different from yours, based on my experience, how long I've been in this field, how detailed my education has been. So we talked about what difficult to control bleeding might be for an EMT, it might be for a medic, or further as an ER physician or one of the nurses or PAs. So minor bleeding, like we talked about, is very easy to control. And then our traumatics, this would not be appropriate for. This would be definitely a tourniquet, stopping the bleeding and addressing other injuries. So in the middle, we've got our difficult to control bleeding, our scalp injuries, and this is definitely something as EMS providers that we don't really have anything good for right now. What the IT clamp does is can address the bleeding wounds where right now we'll put direct pressure and wrap it up like a turban, and usually when we get to the ER they pull it right off, which undoes everything that we've done and reopens the wound. So scalp injuries, and I did bring a scalp so I can show you. As far as other open wounds, basically anything. Deep wounds, anything you can approximate the edge of the skin. Muscle bleeding, junctional, arterial bleeds. Our care priorities are stopping the bleeding and addressing everything else. One of the concerns that we have, well, this is our scalp wound. This is a sample of a scalp wound that was a car accident. One of the nice things about this is that you can put it on in less than 15 seconds and you're done. Then you can keep visualizing it through transport and to the ER. Also, the patient can go into CAT scan and X-ray with it on, just not MRI because it does have metal. So you're not putting your patient at risk by sending them off to radiology, which I know often happens in the ER. So even our little trivial wounds that happen on the scalp can bleed out, and it's something that I think as EMS providers we're not focused on. We're more concerned with ABCs and getting the patient to the hospital. Those little wounds that are in the scalp that can be easily addressed or not until we get into the ambulance and are on our way. So it's usually a 10-15 minute extrication time, and then we're addressing those. So this is what the IT clamp looks like. I think Dr. Berkowitz referred to it as the hair clip from hell. Thank you for that. It's got 8 suture needles. They're 21 gauge. It basically is, this is what it looks like, and I'll show it to you so you can play with it afterwards. So what do we have now? We've got the direct pressure, we've got gauze, we've got the IT clamp, hemostatic agents, tourniquets, and TXA, which we don't have in our region. Okay, so standard gauze, direct pressure. One of the things that we looked at when we were doing this training and putting this together is that there was a Little John study that if you don't have, I'm happy to send to you if you want, but it actually compared standard gauze versus hemostatic, and it was found the outcome was that it's just about the same as far as patient outcomes. So just an interesting study if you're interested in reading it. But direct pressure is perfect, but the question is how long can we hold direct pressure? We've got provider fatigue for long transport times especially, and are they doing it right? Another study that I read showed that direct pressure wasn't being done properly, wasn't being held properly, especially after a few minutes. So this is what the IT clamp looks like on the bottom. There's 8 needles, as I said. You can put it on very quickly. It stops the blood flow at the point of injury in literally seconds, and it maintains the distal flow. One of the nice things when I talk to the police officers about this, and a lot of them are bringing it on in their units, is they can put it on themselves or each other and then continue shooting. You had to be running the other way, but they like it because they're not losing function like they would with their tourniquets, and there's minimal pain. The average is a 1 to 3 on the pain scale in application. So this video that you're going to see, and I hope nobody is opposed to seeing animal testing, but this is an anesthetized pig. And I got to see this live, which was such a great way to show it. So they made a femoral artery, femoral laceration, and they just popped the femoral artery. And if led to bleed out, like 5 to 9 minutes, then this patient would bleed out. So they took the IT clamp out of the box, they put it on. What you saw there was the safety, there's a little safety sticker on there that just popped, and that was the blood that popped up. So they're cleaning it up, making sure it stopped bleeding from the outside. So basically the blood's continuing to flow inside, and then it runs out of room, it forms a clot, and it puts pressure on the open vessel from the inside. So upon arrival to the hospital, and this is what we teach to the ER, they're going to remove the clot that was holding that pressure. And between this blood, the clot there, and the initial blood that you saw, that was the total amount of blood loss for an arterial bleed. Now they're just poking around to see if they can make it bleed, and they can't. So what you can see on the right here, this is a cadaver, and you can see on the right there's the IT clamp in place on the x-ray, and the flow continues. So you can see the clot holding pressure on the vessel there, and the flow is continuous. Some of the history and the evidence behind it, there was a swine study that was done on the right. You can see that they made that same incision that you saw before, laceration, and they let the pig bleed out, and 100% of them didn't survive, not surprising. The next one over, they did direct pressure and standard gauze packing, 3 minutes post-injury, and 60% of the pigs survived, which obviously translates to 40% of them did not. Then they used the IT clamp 3 minutes post-injury, 100% of them survived with just under 500 milliliters of blood loss. And then put on 10 seconds post-injury, just what you saw in the video, 100% survived and only 120 millimeters of blood loss. As a medic sitting in an ALS in service and looking at this, I said 100%, it just sounds a little too good to be true. But to this point, we have not seen any adverse outcomes. I've only heard one anecdote of a story that when the crew moved the patient from the stretcher onto the ER stretcher, it popped off. But at that point, it had stopped bleeding anyway, so they didn't need to reapply it. It's 100% effective at controlling fluid loss in all compressible zones. So FDA approved right now is for scalp and face, not around the eyes. I heard recently of a dog bite on a child that they used the IT clamp to close on the face. They were able to wait several hours for the plastic surgeon to come and repair it, where they didn't have to do something quick in the ER. So it's approved for the face and the head. We're waiting on FDA approval for the neck. My understanding is that in another country there was a gang fight and a guy got slashed across here. They put 2 clamps on. By the time they got to the hospital, he was on the phone ordering a retaliation hit. So, so yeah, I mean, this is what we want to encourage, right? So any compressible zones, and especially where we don't have tourniquets that go on the axial and inguinal spaces, it's great for extremity use, upper chest, and the entire back. So let's see. This is going through we go through what we have. This is part of our training, though. So any agencies that do sign up to get it, they get a full discussion of what's available, what's in your EMS toolbox, and then what options are out there. So we talk about all of it. Another thing that we don't like to talk about, but has to be part of our training, is our mass casualties. This is a very quick and easy thing. We get multiple, a school shooting, God forbid, or a stabbing that was recently in Pennsylvania, where you can just clamp them off really quickly and get out quickly. One of the benefits of this over a tourniquet is it takes a lot less time to put on, and you could transport. A couple of case studies. This was a 36-year-old male who got drunk and in a bar fight. He was hit by a baseball bat. He had a couple of bleeders that stopped on their own, but that one wouldn't stop. Bled all over the bar, the floor, and the ambulance stretcher. One of the nice things that, especially EMS crews, the feedback we've gotten from the agencies that have used it, is that the turnaround time is quicker. They don't have to decon the ambulance as much. It goes on quickly. The blood's not everywhere over the stretcher or on the floor, and crews can get back in service. You also don't need two what's it called? The ambulance is out of service where you need multiple people to hold hands, or hold pressure. So, the ER doctor liked it because it continued allowed continuous visualization of the head and swelling of the skull. And you can see next to the IT clamp that's placed, you can see the swelling. That's the hematoma under the skin. Bulky dressing wouldn't have allowed them to see it. Bleeding stopped in less than 10 seconds. The IT clamp was placed on less than 5. This was a gentleman who was walking to his car with his coffee mug, tripped and fell and cut his hand. He held pressure with his napkins from his car on the way that he drove himself to the hospital. Got to the ER. What's the first thing you guys always say? Let's take a look. Opens it up. The blood flew, spurted across the room, and the patient had the palmar artery was lacerated. Palmar, P-A-L-M-U. So the staffs, this is what I had just told you. So the clamp was placed. There was still some bleeding because of the shape of the hand, and so they put some adrenaline-soaked gauze, and they were able to stop the bleeding. Without the clamp, the patient probably would have needed temporary closure and not been able to wait for the hand surgeon. And the last case study that I have, this was a 36-year-old male who was actually stuck in some sort of machinery, an industrial accident. There was an extended extrication time, so while they waited for the helicopter, they were extricating the patient. 2 tourniquets were placed on because the bleeding didn't stop after just one. These are the vitals upon arrival to the ER. As you know, get to the ER, they loosen the tourniquets. So the bleeding continued, but not from where they thought it was. It wasn't so much from the open fracture, but from a little, I think it was a 3-centimeter wound lateral to the knee joint. The tourniquet was taken down. They put the IT clamp on with some packing inside, which studies have shown from our studies anyway that it's not necessary to put the packing in, but either way, as long as you're approximating the edges of the skin, that's fine. So because of the IT clamp put in place, which you can see there, the patient was able to get a full ED assessment. The arterial hemorrhage was controlled. Patient went to x-ray. That's what they saw. You can see the IT clamp up on the left side in place. And there's the CAT scan. The nice thing about the CAT scan, radiologists that have seen it and the ER doctors that have seen it, really doesn't cause a whole lot of artifact. So they're fine with it being in place. The patient had 1 surgery, and the first surgery was orthopedics, not vascular. Vascular wasn't done until 9 hours later. FDA approval for the device is up to 24 hours. So the bleeding was found to be a torn popliteal artery. So it can be used any types of wounds, high velocity gunshot wounds, knife wounds, entrance, exit. Pediatrics approved for pediatrics, geriatrics, and anybody anticoagulated. No MRI, what we discussed before. Mass casualty is great for in care under fire, any natural disasters. Very easy and quick to put on. So our rule of thumb is if you have a longer than a thumb, you need more than 1. And the reason why we don't have it bigger is because it's really hard to get around those rounded extremities or areas. You'll know if it's not placed properly because it'll still be oozing or bleeding. You can easily take it off and put it back on. It can be used with anything else. You can put quick lad in there. You can put your tourniquet on if need be, if it's still not stopping. So basically, that's our presentation. I go into a lot more detail when I'm teaching, as far as how to use it. But just for some other case studies, this was I was teaching in Chicago, and this came in while we were teaching, so I actually went with them, the Chicago Fire Department. This was a pretty decent knife wound, and they actually were able to put on 2 clamps. They were done in about 30 seconds. Not that it was bleeding a whole lot, but of course, obviously, we want to cover and close it, so infection purposes. This was a young man who decided to get drunk and play with his chainsaw, so he had a pretty decent injury on his left arm. They put on 2 clamps. This is what it looked like when they arrived to the ER, and they waited till he saw. Oh, sorry, I don't have my other picture of him. Thought I did. Maybe I don't. Yeah, this is him 6 hours later. And if you look closely, I don't know if we can on here, but he had some stitches over here, but the rest of this was closed with the IT clamp. That's what it looked like. So you can see a couple of the holes up here from where the IT clamp was in place. Let's see, I don't know if there's anything else I can show you. It's really great for scalp lacerations. I don't think I have the other ones on here. Oh, so this one was a 92-year-old woman who tripped and fell in her nursing home. Apparently, EMS reported that there was blood everywhere. They came in, they put on the IT clamp, blood stop bleeding immediately. She was on Plavix. Hearing a lot of these, especially scalp uses, across the country that we've been training. So, one other note is for car accidents, as they're holding stabilization, they notice a bleed. The IT clamp goes through 2 layers of denim, so it's a nice way to temporarily stop the bleeding, in that kind of situation. And then when they get the patient into the ambulance, they can reposition as needed. So.
What's the cost of these?
Chuck Margaritas is with Healthcare Technologies. He's the distributor. I'm the educator. So, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. What you got?
I have no idea who that is, and I can't hear.
I'm sorry. Chuck Margaritas.
Spell your last name for me.
M-A-R-G-A-R-I-T-E-S.
Thanks.
So I am the distributor for the product. I'm also 25 years in pre-hospital EMS, flight nursing, etc. What you've got here is a mechanical pressure dressing, essentially.
You have to raise your voice for me, Chuck. You
Sorry
keep
about that.
fading down. What you have here is what?
What you've got is a mechanical pressure dressing. So all you need to do is bring the edges of the wound together, and this proves to be a safer, faster, it's actually cheaper, validated product. So what you're looking at is that your flow is going to be maintained, unlike with the tourniquet. So that's one of the benefits of using this. So I see that as being probably the primary reason to use this. The other is that I just want to share one quick case study with you in upstate New York in the Remo region. We just had a deployment the other night where we had a patient who had a INR of 7 and had a scalp wound where they couldn't stop the bleeding. So they applied one of these clamps, the bleeding was stopped in a matter of about 10-15 seconds. So basically what happens is you bleed into the wound pocket, the edges of the wound are closed. As soon as you build up enough pressure that you're above the systolic pressure, you develop stasis. Once the stasis is achieved, it stops bleeding. So that's really all that
Just
I
to
have.
do a quick demo since you're playing with it before you get stuck.
You didn't answer the question. What was the question? The question was the cost.
Yeah, if you want that, I can't tell you. Let me go ahead. I'll answer that first because that is the most important. We're cheaper than tourniquets. Okay, so $39.50 per unit is what we're doing right now. $39.50 per clamp. Which, if you're buying the cat tourniquet or any of the other tourniquets, you're looking at $45-50.
All right, you guys are like children. You already took them out of the box. So the way I teach is you have your gloved hand. You're doing your direct pressure. I teach it as if I'm alone, since we typically are. You're going to pop it open with the other hand. You take it out by the metal bar. You put it onto the wound, and you squeeze it closed, and you're done. And this is your airtight, fluid-tight seal. If you wanted to remove it, you do 2 C's. You squeeze the wings, which takes pressure off the pressure bar, and that opens up the wings. So one side moves, the other side doesn't. So if you want to try to get it open, since you've closed it over there, squeeze the tension bar, and then one wing moves. So I also have a scalp, so you can see. One of the nice things about the scalp is that it's very easy to close, but we do have less skin on our scalp, so you can adjust the opening of the IT clamp so you can only grab a little bit of skin.
Carol, I suppose you want to just grab a small amount if you're doing it over the radial artery as well.
I'm sorry?
I suppose you would want to grab just a small amount if you're going over something like the radial artery.
Basically, you're just closing the skin. You don't need to grab a lot of skin. So this is our scalp that we use. You want to play with that?
I can think it's so.
I got one down there.
Anybody want to do a scalp?
Dr. Scott, do you want all this on the record, all of this stuff? Let me know when we're back on the record. That was crazy. You should have told me to be off the record. That was insane.
Can I answer any questions? I'm sorry? Okay, so the safety seal, when the provider takes it out, that they don't like smoke themselves. So it's really supposed to be.
You can discharge them home to have it removed in 7 days. Just not even suture.
Right.
FDA approved for 24 hours, but I guess if you want to write a script.
So you want to try?
Hey, Jeff, this is Ray from BLS.
For some reason, yeah.
Do we have
I'll tell you, have you ever tried to find the rainy clips when you need it? Oh my God. The what? They're called rainy clips, and they look like this.
Well, can it even be?
The way McAvoy put it to me is it's a yeah.
That sort of seems to be.
Well, yeah, I think
Anybody else want to try?
Squeeze the wings. So you're going to squeeze here first, and then squeeze Feel that? Did you feel it release? So the way it's usually release it, and then one side moves. Just that one.
I've got 2 inches on.
A little bigger, you can, yeah. Our skin is about that way.
Well, that's what they said.
That's the key. You got to hold that.
Joint protocol.
I'll take it.
But anyway, yes, a lot of changes going on. Also, it's 1-to-1. One leaving, one coming, so that's stuff like these things. Yeah,
the state, build the state to us.
Is this,
The state will slowly get anything.
are we adjourning or are we?
Because they don't want to make a decision.
Right.
I don't even have to.
yeah, I'll talk to you.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Are we back on?
I want to,
Yes.
yes,
It's a spring.
Ms. Ackerman, Mr. Margalis, thank you for your presentation. Very interesting. I can see the level of interest here, really playing with the new toys. And I think what we need to decide is if this is something that would be considered. There's no foundation here for us to have anything else to rely on other than what we discuss here right now, if this would be considered a direct pressure device. BOS now allows direct pressure devices or direct pressure, as well as tourniquets, to control uncontrolled bleeding. And I'm not sure what precedents there are for us to just adopt it as a direct pressure device. I'm not sure if the representatives. Craig,
Just your one comment, and again, we can talk a little sidebar about it, but the issue is where this is applied, if it's over a vascular structure, such as a fistula, and I could see, a less informed person potentially doing that, they tend to, stop bleeding, that would cause significant vascular damage. So think about that. So it's not a typical vascular direct pressure device. This has teeth on it that actually can damage more of the skin. If it's used properly, I'm sure that they are aware of that.
Can you respond to that?
Sure. Who is that?
As the distributor, the teeth on the device, when closed completely, are 4 millimeters into the skin. So it's superficial the way that it closes. Just I know that addresses some of the concern, but not all of them.
Yeah, fistulas are superficial.
So it seems to me that it wouldn't be just a simple pressure device. You'd really have to have some training, beyond, your tourniquet and the common things that are used for bleeding control. So I don't know if it's as straightforward as just saying it's a pressure device and we can approve it. I don't know what the process would be, but I think that training would probably, just to avoid the complications that you just pointed out, would probably be appropriate.
Well, we had a discussion down here whether we needed to pursue this further with perhaps state BOS folks to find out where we would stand if we did introduce it. And perhaps we ought to hold off on that. That's what the consensus seems to be in our discussions. That looks like a useful device when properly applied, but where is the approval? Unless you can tell us about approval from New York State Department of Health.
Well, from what we've understood and what we've gathered is that New York State doesn't approve or disapprove any medical devices. It's actually being used now for the last 4 months up in Saratoga with Mike McAvoy, and they felt very comfortable moving forward. It's a training, key, and that's my job, is to go and make sure that everybody is properly trained on how to use this and when to use this. So, the FDA approval is there for all levels. So it's really, we'll set the protocols in place and make sure they have proper understanding and education before we deploy it.
Look, when we started seeing these hemostatic devices come out, they have, even the first ones when the granules came out, people were using the granules. Okay, so the granules had some downside too, because they generated a lot of heat and those kinds of things, and they could be left in the wound, and people came into hospitals and didn't know what they were, and a variety of different things. So, you have the same sort of thing here, and in terms of just a simple bandage, you're training medics and EMTs to use bandages in a certain way, and there's all different kinds of brands and stuff like that, and some of them may be better, some of them may be worse, but we don't approve or disapprove one of those brands. So I think it falls under I don't think we should make an exception for this. We haven't making an exception for other devices. I think it's a responsibility of the company. They're going to train folks, and also, look, there will be some liability on us, but there's also going to be a liability on them. Just as with all these devices, if some enterprising person decides that this device caused, a major problem. So I think that we can't make a special exception for this, and it should basically fall under a pressure device.
Within the office and within the region, there's been a lot of agencies that have called us and asked us about it, and we weren't sure how to answer the questions as, is it just a direct pressure device that can be used by anyone, or is it something that has to be MAC approved? And that's why we asked them to come here today to show it to you guys and see what you think and see what we need to do with it. The other reason that we asked them to come was so that if you did see it come into your facility, at least you knew what it was. You know, as far as the region, we don't know if it's good, bad, indifferent, or, you know, supporting anything on it. We just want to make everybody aware that it is out there. We don't know if agencies are using it. I was talking to an agency yesterday, said they're gonna put it on their trucks tomorrow. I said, oh, okay, you know, and I don't know if that's good or bad. I don't know if they can, and that's really why I kind of wanted to have it here today, so that we can decide what we should do with it. Is it a direct pressure device and just, you know, a BLS agency can use it, or does it have to be something that has to be approved?
How can we get that documented, whether it is simply a direct pressure device? Is anybody going to give us that answer? Anybody in the state can be able to give us that
I
answer?
have some sample protocols that are being used across the country, and they have it falling under the hemorrhage control protocol as a mechanical direct pressure. So, you know, that's what the other agencies in Westchester that have started using it are using as their protocol.
I mean, airway devices fall into the same sort of thing. We have all kinds of airway devices out there. We're not approving each one of these airway devices. Some of them have been good, some of them are bad, some of them, you know, and so, I don't know. I just think we have to do it in comparison to some of these other things.
Do our state representatives have any insight to where use of these devices would be?
Carol has been approved at CMAP.
I don't know who that is.
Richard Robinson, the
Richard
State
Robinson.
Health Department.
Again, I mean, my understanding was that it had to be approved regionally, that the state would not approve or disapprove any particular medical device. So that's been my answer whenever I've asked.
I'd have to check with Mr. Johnson up at the State Health and the Central Office and ask that. Other than that, I have no comment.
Mr. Lamarca?
The other thing I think you can fairly ask the state is how would they classify the device? Not any endorsement, because obviously the state will not endorse, nor will we. So I think the only thing you're gonna get from the state is it a pressure device or just a hemorrhage control device? And that might help you out. I think the other thing is just, what is it approved for at the FDA? If I heard correctly, it's only really for scalp and face, and not on many of the things we just saw the demo.
No, any compressible area, extremities, inguinal, axial.
I thought in your presentation you said what the FDA approved.
The FDA approved all compressible areas, including
It's not.
the scalp, the face, and the extremities.
Mr. Robinson, with your access to Mr. Johnson, could you get us an answer whether this is considered a compressible wound compression device?
So the November meeting.
For the next meeting.
Okay.
State council tomorrow.
So I'm going to suggest that we put this on the agenda, that it was a good presentation. We're all interested in the product. It looks like it has great potential, but to make sure that we're doing it the right way, that we're going to wait to see if the state considers this a direct compression device, in which case we can turn it loose, basically, with proper training, of course. I mean, it would behoove each agency to have proper training for it, but it would not require our specific approval.
Unless I'm wrong, I don't think the region has any status in it. I don't think you can approve it or not. You know, I
You may
just
be
think
right.
any agency can make a decision.
The agency can do, if it's considered a compressible device, a wound compression device. Right now, we don't.
Even if it's not, it might not fall underneath the parameters of anybody having any say in it.
We do have literature that it is a compressible device, so.
I think the agency has to approve it themselves.
Well, the agency can only do it if the state approves it. It may not be in our purview to do make any decision about it. You may be right, we don't have to approve it. But no agency can use it unless the state says that it's a.
It has been deployed in the Remo region.
It has.
Yes.
I don't think the state's.
Under the auspice that it's a device, not a drug. Didn't need REMAC approval. They saw the device and started using it.
Up to you to decide.
I think as long as the FDA approves it
Yeah.
for use, you're good, and it's up to the agency to decide whether they want to use it or not. And if the agency medical director wants to get involved, then that's another layer.
given that it doesn't require our vote, perhaps our minutes should just reflect that we received an educational session on the ITT clamp. Is that ITT?
IT.
IT clamp. By representatives of,
Does that mean you want me to take out that whole presentation out of the minutes? Is that what you're saying?
well, you can
You
make a
want me to
summary
like
of it.
redact it? But I need to know if I'm gonna delete
I'm not
like
sure
10
that you need to
pages
put in
of.
everything about that presentation at all. I just think if that we have a
Okay, but let's
presentation
go
by.
off the record for a minute because
I
I need to
believe-
know what you're doing.
I would think that we could just say, a presentation was made by
Okay.
representatives of the IT clamp company
I'll put a
regarding a
parenthetical in there.
hemostatic
That's fine.
device.
So you want me
for field use.
to delete
No,
that
no, why-
entire,
Keep the whole
Keep-
presentation?
Yeah, why not?
That
What if
is-
in the future we need it for,
Mhm.
what's the point of deleting, you know? What was that get?
Are you capable of, I mean.
I can do whatever you want me to do, Dr. Studd. I
You know,
just need
whatever
to
the
know
committee
what
wants.
you
If
want me to
If
do.
folks feel that they need to have that in there, that's fine.
I just need a very clear directive
Just gonna
on
read it.
what I'm taking out of the record if I'm taking anything out.
All right, so.
Because I can't just delete like 10 pages of the record without a very clear directive from you.
10 pages of the record. Great. Leave it in. Our executive director and several members feel that, leave it in, and
Okay.
summary, see the presentation with no votes, nothing on that.
Okay, so,
Okay.
okay. So, I'm
only
gonna
thing-
leave the entire record how it was.
Okay. It sounds like we're not in a position to approve or disapprove it, so that's said and done. But I think the only question is there anything we can do to improve as this body to improve the safety of the use of this device? And I think that's the only, is there anything that we do have the power to do? Either to make recommendations on what we suggest should be included in education, or is there anything that we can do to improve it? Because clearly we're not going to be the one to say thumbs up or thumbs down. All we can do is maybe make some recommendations. So that my suggestion would be to, in November, if people want to think about any recommendations we can make regarding this to improve the safety, I think that's something we can do. Is that something that's in the power of this body?
I can share it.
Certainly seems some basic education is necessary for the personal safety of the medics applying.
Well, that's still like a corporation that sells that product.
Well, that's a print, Ms. Ackerman is not gonna be able to go to every agency. She is. You're gonna go to every agency that wants to use it, is that correct?
Yeah.
Dr. Stuck, we have a field of team educators in addition to clinical specialists that will do the training one-on-one with all agencies. So the agencies will, each one of the agencies will be trained and signed off before they deploy. That's the strategy.
That's great.
It's much like, it's the same, it's the same exact system that we used initially when we rolled out Care Products, EasyIO. We did the same type of training. We sent field educators in the field. We made sure that people were signed off, validated and comfortable with the procedure, answered any questions, gave them a 1 hour to an hour and a half block before it was turned loose. So, and I know later on down the line that kind of changed. When we initially rolled it out, that was the way that we handled all new agencies coming on board.
Quick question, if you train an agency in a particular area, and they're going to be going to a hospital facility.
We train the receiving facility as well on how the device works and how to remove it.
Okay.
In addition to that, we have cards that come in with every patient. Again, it's very similar to the other manufacturer that I've represented in the past. They go in with the card, has a telephone number on it that has customer support available to them right away. And they'll have access to clinical specialists and people like myself as well.
There's a GPS unlock, you can call in. Unlock.
Just so you know, it's the people that started this company, the Innovative Trauma Care, are the same people that started EasyIO company and Provided Care. So they're rolling it out very similarly how it was with, as Chuck said, with the EasyIO. So we train everybody multiple times, based on how this is done. I have field educators that will come in my absence if I can't be there, or just to cover more territory or more shifts. So we make sure that before it's deployed, everybody is comfortable with it.
One other question for me. A lot of devices, you have to get a carton of 25 or 50 or something like that? What, and these devices, how do they come?
Good question. We can sell them individually, or we can sell them in packages of 10.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comment on the IT devices?
I just have a question, just so I'm
Great.
just getting the information properly. I have a couple of agencies, BLS agencies in Rockland who are interested in moving forward in the next 2 weeks. So it's based on their medical director's approval. If their agency approves it, is that where we're leaving it?
It's our sense that we do not have any comment to support, to approve it or disapprove it, so
Okay,
it's not.
I just want to make sure that, okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thank you. That concludes our agenda, unless there's any other issues that anybody wanted to bring up. Can I get a motion for adjournment? A second?
Who made the motion?
Dr. Bennett.
Who made the
All
second?
in favor? Opposed?